Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.
Bryony Kimmings has been creating and performing shows based closely on events in her own life since her award-winning Sex Idiot in 2010. Since then, she's written and performed 7 Day Drunk, Credible Likeable Superstar Role Model, Mega, Fake It Till You Make It, A Pacifist Guide to the War on Cancer with Complicité and the National Theatre, and I'm a Phoenix Bitch. Her latest solo show, Bog Witch, is currently on a tour of the UK and Ireland. I spoke to Bryony early in the tour and asked her to explain what the show is about.
Bog Witch, like all my work, is a story of a slice of time in my life. True stories is what I make for theatre. And it's the story of moving to the countryside and not really wanting to. And being a person who hasn't really got on very well with nature or kind of with any kind of environmental issues, and meeting and falling in love with a man who that was his entire life, and wanting to blend our families, and therefore not really being able to fight for living in a stinky old city that costs a fortune. So moving out and kind of reconnecting with nature, really finding solace and healing in something very simple and kind of pared back and not expecting to, and sort of becoming an eco-convert, really. And I guess the reason why I made it was because if I can become someone that cares, this is what I thought, if I can become someone that cares about the environment and not be selfish and be a bit more sort of engaged and switch on and insert the planet into my very scattergun, busy life and the chaos that surrounds me and my son as two neurodivergent people, then anyone can. That's sort of the reason why I made it. And I guess Bog Witch is a hopefully quite funny and light to a certain extent and non-offensive and not scary show about the planet and wanting to encourage people to save it. And I guess that came from a feeling that a lot of, in inverted commas, climate plays or work about the environment or the ecological crisis had in previous years been quite worthy and serious and maybe even kind of ill-inducing. So a show that sort of seeks to entertain you and open your heart about those issues and demonstrate that we can do that in a way that feels safe and fun.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just plays about the climate crisis. I think generally plays with a message. They tend to forget the entertainment bit of it that even Brecht thought was important. So how do you get that balance?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I mean, we don't have the culture quite so much of having dramaturgs. I mean, we are now, I think, catching up Europe in that sense, but for me, a dramaturg is my job as well as being an actor and a performer. And everyone in the room, I try and, in my creative team, give them the role of dramaturg, which for me means what's the audience experiencing? What is the audience getting from this? It's not just me standing on the stage. It's not just, there's not just my opinion. It has to be in that complicity that happens in the theatre that's so good about going to the theatre. What are they thinking and feeling is first and foremost, I suppose. And I think often it can be forgotten. I don't know how, but I do sometimes often watch stuff and be like, what was anybody thinking was going to happen? And so therefore, if every scene we make and every moment we discuss, we're discussing it from the point of view of someone who hasn't seen the show before, hasn't heard this part. So that's one thing that I think helps to keep you grounded in, like, we're like primarily here to entertain. Like, we are here to, theatre is expensive and to go to, and people are giving their time and, schlepping out of their homes where they could just sit and watch telly. We need to give them a really good night out. And at the same time, the kicker is maybe inspire them to do something or change in some incremental way by moving them so much and giving them a gift in that way. But yeah, I think it's tricky. I think it is tricky to make issue-based plays. I mean, I've always done it. That's what I've always done, wanted to talk about important subjects that have infiltrated my life and then kind of messed me up some, and wanting to make sure that there's some kind of documentation of that for other people who might find themselves in that position or know people or encounter that later in life or whatever that might be. But it's tricky. And I think humour is the key. It's got, that's not necessarily true for all makers, but for me, humour is key. If I think about how I talk to my friends, I'll always, I'm a jolly, funny person. So I will always be the light relief, I suppose, in a negative or difficult situation. It can be quite annoying, I think, sometimes. But yeah, I think, especially with the climate, it's like it had to be funny and fun. And I think for a performer, that means you have to be the idiot, you have to be the clown, you have to be the sort of the worst person in the room. So everyone else feels like at least I'm not her. There's a sort of element of that mirror that, all practitioners have spoken about. You're a mirror, you're a mirror, you're a mirror.
Yeah, you're not exactly kind to yourself, but certainly where you start from in the play, you don't come out in the best light, really, do you?
No, and I don't think I've ever played myself as such a character before. I think in my earlier career, I was more sort of punk about it, like I was, all right, I was in a sort of vamped up or extreme version of myself, but I stuck to the truth, and I didn't perform quite so much. But because I've had this break and I've been writing telly and film and characters, and I think my brain has just turned into, okay, we can fictionalize this person, we can lean into certain parts of my character that were, at the beginning because it's seasons, isn't it? The play is over the course of 4/5 seasons. And in spring, I'm an idiot. I'm an absolute idiot. But it's important that I'm an idiot. It's like, what is the countryside? What is this tractor? It's sort of important. It was important to sort of be the fool. So leaning more into those sort of typical theatre tropes felt important.
Yeah, and by making something that's firstly entertaining, that people might come to be entertained and then happen to learn something, that's probably the way around to actually not just be preaching to the converted, isn't it? And they learn along with the character of yourself that you're playing, don't they? Yes,
I think that's right. Yeah, that seemed to be best. And actually, funny you mentioned Brecht, because weirdly, he was one of the main influences to the show. And I wouldn't normally say that, like something you learn about in theatre GCSE and theatre A level. And then when I studied theatre at university, we were constantly talking about Brecht. And so therefore for the most part of your career, like, I don't want to talk to you about Brecht, I'm a performance artist. And actually it was like, okay, the more that was being made and the more that was being decided, it was like, God, this is really heavily influenced by him, and rediscovering the sort of amazing rules of that type of theatre and why. And, it was very inspiring and also very pleasing for me, because it's like, rediscovering a love of theatre again after being away for quite some time. It was good.
Yeah. And over the course of the play, you actually learn to sort of love the countryside in a sense. At the start, it reminded me of, I don't know if you've ever watched Escape to the Country on daytime TV. Those people who say they're going to give up being a stockbroker and then they're going to keep llamas and do crafts for a living. And obviously they never do, or they were likely to fail at it if they did. But that's the sort of character you're building to start with, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say so. Exactly. Daytime TV, nature wannabe. Yeah.
But by the end, there is various parts of it where the audience might be saying, no, don't do that. No, you can't do that. Like the incident with the oak tree, perhaps.
No.
And I suppose that's Brechtian, isn't it? That you're putting forward situations to get the audience to think what are the consequences of that decision.
Absolutely, yeah. And also, I think there's things like getting changed, showing where the set is coming from, putting it to the side, not trying to have any illusions as to that this character is a real person feeling real feelings at the beginning. Yeah, I think there's heavy influences there, which is satisfying. I find that quite satisfying. And so did the designer. It's like, okay, right, we're making Mother Courage, but we're we're not,
Yeah. Yeah, talking of the design, it's quite technical, really. I mean, on the surface, when you walk into the theatre, it looks fairly sparse, the set. But there's a lot of technical details in there with the projections and the lighting and loads of bits of set and props and costumes. That's a lot to coordinate, isn't it, in a solo show?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't make it all, like it was a team of us. And actually, it's the track of it in terms of what you have to do and on and off is quite straightforward, actually. As long as there's wing space, basically.
Yeah.
Sort of like, I mean, there's a couple of quick changes that is like hairy, but yeah, it's how I make work's a bit different maybe to how other people do. Because I'm not a stand-up, although some people think that I'm more on that side. And I'm not really a director, I've directed a couple of things, but I wouldn't say that I'm trained as a director and know how to move things around the stage or tell actors how to perform in any way. But we make kind of as a group. So I suppose when you make a theatre show at the National, you might, you'd have your design 4 or 5 months in advance. You'd have your lighting guy coming in only for the time that you're teching, maybe a couple of meetings. And I found that very stressful when I did it. And it didn't feel right for me. It didn't feel like the right use of time. And I had the luxury when I made my last show, Phoenix, of having everyone in the room over a summer, which was like sort of ridiculous, but also wonderful. The university gave us their theatre. We could stay very cheaply. So therefore I could pay everyone just to be there the whole time. And then it was like, okay, that integration of video, lights, set, things feeling highly engineered and highly technical is because as we were making that moment, that piece of performance, we weren't then going to come later and try and light it. We weren't then going to try and crowbar some video into it in the tech. Rather, we were making it, okay, what will this look like? What video might help convey the message of what we're trying to say to the audience at this point? So in that egalitarian way, I think what the show's benefited from is it's highly technical, but also feels it doesn't feel superfluous.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel sort of tacked on. It actually feels like there's a canvas that spreads the whole stage.
It's integral to the whole thing.
It's sort of as we're going, yeah. Again, that's sort of just theatre-wise, I think it's quite unusual to make work that way. It's not expensive because there's only one performer. I think if you had a whole cast, you would never be able to kind of run with that many creatives in a room. It would be pandemonium. But that's the way that me and my guys have always, or the last 3 or 4 shows now, small shows, tried to do.
Do you actually start with a script, or is it devised from a theme in rehearsals?
A couple of people in the team will really laugh at this because yeah, we start with a script, but normally we would do a read through on the first day and I throw it in the bin.
Right.
I get really panicked that I need to know what it is, which I think is a really strong feeling for anyone that makes theatre. It's like I need to know what the end result is, and it's such a almost rite of passage for me now that I've spent a month writing a show that I'll immediately throw in the bin as soon as everyone kind of sits around the table and reads it. I think next time I'll really trust the fact that we are making this show in the room. Like there might be some small amounts of text that are really the backbone of the story, or I might write the chronological story without the flouncy language, just to sort of say, okay, we're dealing with this time in my life. These are the feelings that were happening, but not bother to try and explain scenes because imagining a scene in your head, for me anyway, if you're also trying to think, it's not playwriting, if you're also trying to think about video and you're also trying to think about music and you're also trying to think about choreography and you're thinking, you're seeing it as the entire picture in your head as you're writing it, which is what the play will now look like when you read it from printed out. It will have all of the lighting changes, it will have all the video and that will all make sense. But if you try, I feel like I try and write everyone's jobs, and then everyone goes like, what are you doing? And then I go, oh yeah, sorry, I'll just throw that in the bin. And also sometimes I try to be something I'm not. I definitely for this show felt like, am I any good at this? Do I know how to do this? Like that sort of dark bit of me that all artists have, which is just like, are you sure you remember how to do this? Better write it down, chuck it in the bin.
Yeah. But you need that starting point though. You need to sort of get it out of your head onto paper to start with.
You do. Yeah. And often it's quite good to go like, okay, tell you what, it's not that.
Yeah. But all of your shows are very autobiographical, which is quite exposing, really. A lot of people would prefer to hide behind a more obviously fictional character for things that, even if it's something semi-autobiographical. Even after all these years, do you find it exposing, or does it just come naturally to you now?
Less and less so. I think I studied theatre. It was called Modern Drama Studies, the course I did at Brunel. I thought I was going to be, I didn't know anything about theatre. I thought I was going to be an actress. I thought that's how you were an actress. I'd never even heard of drama school. No one had helped me at school to sort of figure out what that might be. So I just went to this college, this uni that my friend was at, and just studied modern theatre. And it wasn't theatre at all. It was performance art, and it was really avant-garde, unscripted to the most part. There was some scripted work, but weirdos cutting themselves and bleeding in galleries, and it was my dream. I didn't know I loved that kind of work, but I was like hooked as soon as it, began.
Yeah.
It's forced entertainment was on the syllabus. There was some, Third Angel, some blast theory. There's some scripted stuff, but mostly body-based performance artists like Annie Sprinkle, Marina Abramovich. So I think that it wasn't playwriting, it wasn't acting. So when I finally sort of thought, okay, spent all my 20s getting pissed and running club nights in East London and being naughty, and then I was like, okay, I was working as a dance producer, not dance music, contemporary dance. I'd got a job in the arts to sort of help my club kid persona, and also kind of to pay the rent. But I didn't want to get a job in performance art, because I thought if I become a administrator in the performance art sector, I'll never be a performance artist. And I always knew I wanted to be a performance artist, but I just felt like constantly I didn't have anything to say. So when I finally kind of decided I was going to make work, it was always going to be about my life, because that's what artists did. That wasn't, I didn't have any idea of what theatre was. I didn't know what Edinburgh was. I didn't know anything. And, I could have just Googled it, but I just didn't, I just didn't know.
Yeah.
I wasn't a theatre person. I wouldn't have gone to the theatre, really. And I remember when Sex Idiot went to Soho Theatre, like the first show I made, it went straight to Soho Theatre after Edinburgh, which I was told was amazing. And I had no idea what Soho Theatre was. And, I was busy watching stuff in galleries and kind of around the back of garages. And I hadn't known about it. And I remember sitting down with Nina Steiger, who I still work with, who's now the head of new work at the National. She's like an old friend of mine, but the first time I met her, and she sort of sat down with my script, which was my handwritten notes on paper that, like, I didn't have a computer, I don't think. And she was like, right, we're going to have to talk a bit about structure. And I was like, oh, what do you mean? And she was like, there's this thing called the 3-act structure, and if you move this here and you put that there, then that will solve that problem. And me just being like, what is this? And loving it, again, a bit like you, absolutely loving it and being like, wow, that's amazing, but also just being like, I don't know what that is. So it was never a question that it would be autobiographical. And also, I suppose it's gone all right for me. So I wouldn't have ever, I did try and write plays. I just don't buy them. I don't, it's not for me.
Yeah.
I like watching them, some of them, and I like the amazing things that people can do, but I just cannot do them. I can't. And also sometimes when I'm watching them, I do just want to shout out, "Hey, what's your actual name? You know,
Yeah.
what's your story?" I don't know if I could ever do that, you know.
Yeah.
Not an actor, not a playwright. I'm a performance artist.
Yeah. And it's all about your life. But you never worry that you're going to run out of stories if it's all just about you.
I mean, I have run out of stories. You know, the last 5 years, I didn't have anything to say. I could have. I had some commissions that came in. I was going to make a show about this. I was going to make a show about that. And I have a young family, not that young anymore, but it didn't feel right. And it didn't, you know, luckily work had come in other sectors, because in the theatre sector, you do unfortunately have to make a volume of work to be able to continuously be touring, you know, and to be able to make a living, not a good living, you know, really. And I wanted a house, I wanted stability, and I wanted to take my kids to school. And so even though I had a few stories, none of them seemed pressing, you know, like it wouldn't have been worth it. Nobody needed them enough for me to be like, guys, I'm off, but I'm doing it. You know, now I've done Bog Witch, I feel like all of the family are with me on it. They're like, yep, you need to go and do this show around and about. You need to inspire people in this issue, because we're all in this property. We've also got another family that live with us in the garden, not like in the veggie beds, but actually in a caravan. You know, everyone's like, go. You know, because I was wondering for ages what I could do. What can I do about the climate crisis? What can I do? And the only thing I could think of that I could do was talk about it and inspire people to think about it and not be scared about it. So I was like, okay, now I have a story. But I don't know if I'll have another one. I'm kind of all right if I don't have another one.
Yeah.
I think I used to really live for this, you know, and now I live for other things.
You don't go back to your older shows from different parts of your life?
I mean, I've got to bloody do Edinburgh, and I'm doing Sex Idiot.
Right.
Which I agreed to because my friend Francesca Moody, who's the producer of Edinburgh and also produced Fleabag and Baby Reindeer and all of those greats who I've known for a long time. Every year that Edinburgh has happened, she's asked me, will you please do Sex Idiot? And I'm like, nope. And this year I was like, do you know what? I'll do it. So I've got a show that I wrote when I was 28. Now I'm 45. It's mostly nude. And it's all about this sort of sex life of a 20-year-old, you know, and I don't even know what the script is, to be honest, but I'm doing it for 2 nights only. I think I'm doing it for a night in Edinburgh and then a night at the Young Vic. But no, very rarely will I go back over work. It doesn't feel right. It feels like that's done. That's done now. Yeah.
Probably more so because it's about your life. It's about a particular time in your life and a particular age when you've changed since then.
I sometimes felt like if anyone ever asked me, which they probably won't, to do a retrospective of all of the shows, that I would try and find actors at that age to play those parts. Because that would be interesting. Although I always thought I'd do Credible, which is the one I made with my niece, and my niece was 9 and she's now 22. I would want to remake that show with her as a 22-year-old, I think.
Right.
Me and her do that together, because we've always spoken about like remounting it or doing a sort of, you know, she's a totally different person now. She's grown up. So like, what does that mean to be an auntie and a niece? But we haven't quite found what that means yet.
Yeah.
But we're always chatting about it. Like sometimes when we see each other, we do the dances and stuff from the show because we can just remember them. They're like etched in our brains.
Yeah. That might be a strange experience though, to see somebody else playing you.
I wouldn't mind that. There's often been conversations about touring and stuff, about whether or not it could be an actress. People have done it, like Simon McBurney had it where it was him in the show, you know. I mean, it's sort of him. He's him, and then he's also playing this part of this guy in the Amazon. And he was played by somebody else, I think in Australia, on the Australian tour. And there's been talk of it, like, you know, producers over the years, like, sure you want to do it? And somebody wanted to do something on Broadway, and I was like, I can't really take that much time off work, and the children. And there was discussion about whether it should be a celebrity doing it, and they were just like, oh, let's just leave it. It just seems strange, you know, like what's the point? I don't have these grand ambitions to be famous. I don't have these big needs to do a Broadway. You know, like it's not, I'd be lovely. And if people ask me to do stuff, I'm always super keen. But maybe I used to be more ambitious, but I'm just a bit more like, oh, that sounds like a lot of work. Thank you. I don't want to.
Yeah, maybe that's a getting older type thing, got more responsibilities and less ambition, perhaps. But what about, you said friends and family are supportive of you going off on tour, but do friends, because it's autobiographical work, are friends and family worried that they're going to pop up in your shows?
Not really. I mean, some people will say, oh, don't put this in your show. And I think to myself, I won't. Don't worry. I won't, taxi driver. But I know, because one of the key rules of mine is before I talk about anyone, I would check and I would speak to them, and I would, you know, when I said I wanted to make a show about, you know, the Bog Witch show, and Will features quite a lot in it, we had to talk a lot about what, you know, because he comes across as a bit of a geek and also sort of as a bit of a, you know, a pedant sometimes in that show. So and he can be a geek and a pedant, you know what I mean? But he's also a really lovely man. Yeah. So we had to talk a lot about, you know, why depict him that way? Why depict me that way? Is it right? I mean, Will makes the videos in the show, so he's there in the rehearsal room all the time. He's an artist as well. But yeah, I mean, I've had to check with my mum. I've had to check with my son. You know, like I have to all the time throughout my career. I've had to tiptoe that line, but no one sort of assumes that they'll be in them. I don't think it puts anyone off. I don't know. Might do. Might be like, I'm not going to be friends with her. She'll probably bloody talk about me. But I feel like most stand-ups talk about their lives a lot. You know, like, oh, my wife, you know, she's on one. And yeah, I think it's probably less insensitive than that, because it's always done with like, the reason why I have to talk about this is for the following reasons, and can you fact check it, and would you like to have a right to reply to that? And legally as well, I have to, you know, I have to do that. Yeah.
I was wondering also about how important audience participation is, because in Bog Witch there is some. It's fairly non-threatening compared to some shows, but it's there, and it is quite important, isn't it? Yeah.
It is important. I mean, right at the beginning of my career, I always thought there would be always audience participation. And that makes immediately every bum hole on the podcast audience go tight, I would imagine. That's a really nice way of saying it. Yeah. Bryony. But, you know, like, audience participation. It's like, really, it's like the singing the song at the end of the pantomime. It's the poor guy who gets dragged up and a pair of tits put on him so everyone can laugh at him. Or it's the person who, you know, the show where someone gets dragged up on stage and that person is sort of out of control and it's embarrassing for the performer. You know, there's a lot of things that can go wrong with audience participation, and a lot of times I've seen it where it's like, that was completely unnecessary. Yeah. However, if we're talking about 400 or 500 people in a room, then, and we're talking and I'm breaking the fourth wall as soon as I walk on stage, say, hi, I'm Bryony, you're here, I'm here, let's get into it. Then the natural kind of ending is that we cross over. You know, like if we're transmuting emotions backwards and forwards, then the natural thing is our physical bodies to do that, as far as I'm concerned. And also, you know, participating in something can really solidify the take home of something, right? That's what I think. But if I don't have to use it, if I can square with myself that there's no reason to have anyone do anything in the show, I won't do it, because I think it can be so eggy. But a few times I've used it and it's really made a show. So I'm not adverse to it, but I have rules. I have rules. It can't be laughing at people's expense. It can't be sing-alongs because people hate to sing and doesn't really do anything to people if you make them sing. There's a couple of people in the audience who might be like, I love singing. And the performers on stage love singing because they've been singing their whole lives. But actually people in the audience, I don't think like singing, particularly.
Unless you're in Edinburgh where they're mostly performers in the audience anyway.
Exactly. And then you're just preaching to the converted anyway.
Yes.
But I think probably one of my favourite moments, but also probably the most Marmite moment that I ever created for an audience was at the end of the cancer musical that I wrote for the National, where the audience, after watching these true stories about terminal cancer diagnoses, were invited, if they wanted to have a moment, we've been talking about really heavy stuff. And also, if they wanted to say the name of someone that they'd been thinking about in the show, or that they might have lost to cancer, or they might be, going through cancer, then this is a space for everybody to speak about because cancer is so present in all of our lives. And some people hated that. And some people loved it. They just desperately wanted to. They'd been thinking of their mum the whole time. They just wanted to say it out loud. And often it would be a cacophony and there'd be a lot of crying. And it seemed really important to me to have that moment because otherwise you're going to walk out of the venue and want to shout, Leslie Hammond.
Yeah.
But there's nobody listening, and so it felt important. But I think, I've done a lot of different audience things, from asking the audience to give me their pubic hair right at the beginning of beginning of my career, all the way through to getting a girl drunk on stage and spending the entire show with me, to not doing it at all and not needing to. Phoenix had no audience participation whatsoever. It didn't need it. This show has some light audience participation. I mean, there's a ongoing question as to whether or not I'll go to this event at the end of the year. Am I the sort of person that would go to this sort of event? And at the end, we recreate the event. And it's, volunteers, and it's gentle, and you're for the most part, quite unseen. And because we've been talking about it the whole time, it feels really nice. There's been discussion as to whether to cut it for Edinburgh, and because of the length of the show, and it's just kind of would defeat the entire object of the narrative. It's a producer question where people are like, should we just cut the end? Because that'd be the easiest bit to cut. And it's I kind of feel like that might be the best bit. But so it's a tricky one, audience participation. It can be very galvanizing and very memorable. It can be absolutely disgusting.
Yeah. And you do establish a rapport with the audience. It's sort of a friendly banter with the audience right from the start of the show, don't you? So I suppose that makes it feel less threatening in a way.
Yeah. I mean, when I teach, I have rules. It's like, make sure the audience sees you. I mean, I totally don't stick to my own rules, but make sure the audience sees you at the side of the stage before you begin, you're a person, you're a normal person. At some point, come off the stage and go back on it again. So they're like, oh, okay, she goes off the stage. And then, another point, ask someone to do something pretty arbitrary, like undo your bra or help you put something on. So you're sort of coaxing and easing them into the idea that, so it doesn't feel so formalized. Asking someone to do something in the audience in the first scene is almost impossible. At the end, you can kind of slowly grease the axle. Yeah. But the audiences are shrewd. They know if it's bollocks. They know if it's not necessary. You have to do this, otherwise we can't finish. Well, that's a lie, because if I don't do it, it's going to end because it's going to have to end because no one's doing it. So, the falsity doesn't work very well. But
you mentioned teaching. I noticed on your website that you actually do a course in autobiographical storytelling. What do you teach in that? How do you get people to do it?
You just teach them how to make theatre from their own lives. So I think the first day we talk about who they are as people and what questions they have about the world and what they're interested in talking about and what stories they might have within them. And the second day we talk about, well, if they're we sort of ask a question about the world on the first day, and we stick with that question, and then we start to make hypothetical shows for the rest of the week. So second day we look at form. What would this question look like if it was a musical? What would answering this question look like if it was a one-to-one performance in a toilet? What would it look like if it was a straight play? The third day we talk about story and structure. The fourth day we talk about how to make chronologically and, create from our own life stories. And then on the fifth day we perform some material. It's a thing, isn't it? Autobiographical work, whether we like it or not, and probably my fault. It's around.
Yeah.
Well, my fault in this era, because there's previous iterations of women just like me before me, but I sometimes think, oh God, I'm creating a monster. But I love autobiographical work when it's done really well, and I think I'm just trying to help people do it well. And a lot of shows have come through it, actually. Lots of people that create work have come through, and I see the shows and, I get to go and look at them and clap my hands at them. So yeah, I teach turning your life into theatre. It's not for everyone. Not everyone's good at it, but some people are very good at it, including me.
Yes, absolutely. I'll testify to that. So this is on Bog Witch is on quite a big tour, and you say it's going to Edinburgh as well. You, I'm assuming from what you said before that you don't have something next that you're planning yet.
No, I want to make a really large dance piece with a choreographer friend of mine at some point, but that I don't have the energy. And I'm writing telly, writing films, and happy doing that. And the next few years are already sort of chocker with all of that. So no, I've got nothing. But then you never know. Sometimes I'm just like, I need to do something, and I just do it. So who knows?
That was Bryony Kimmings, whose show Bog Witch has been performed so far at Soho Theatre in London, Attenborough Centre in Brighton and Home Manchester. And from May to October 2026 can be seen at Tunbridge Wells, Coventry, Cambridge, Bristol, Worthing, Worcester, Newbury, Dunleary, Nottingham, Chester, Bradford, Lancaster, Cardiff and Leeds. For more information, see www.bryonykimmings.com.
You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.